All right, thank you, Alec, and we'll start your 10 minutes now.
Great. Thank you. Privileged to be here today to talk about housing. I have the privilege of representing the voice of social workers and our commitment to human rights, social justice, and the importance of assuring that housing is a human right. I'm also privileged to chair the Nova Scotia Action Coalition for Community Wellbeing, a coalition of community members dedicated to working strategically and collaboratively towards community wellbeing and a better quality of life for everyone. Social workers in Nova Scotia are committed to ensuring that housing is a right and recognize that housing is health. Stress from housing insecurity has a significant impact on our physical, mental, and social health, leading to premature death, chronic illness, and social exclusion. Ensuring that everyone has a housing secure future is critical for the clients that social workers serve, the health of individuals, and our collective community well-being. I offer the following proposed amendments to the Housing and Supply Service Act towards these ends. In Section 2, the purpose of the Act is to improve and to increase the, I would add, affordable housing, ensuring that that is primary. I would add to this as well, in terms of the section, ensuring everyone has the right to access adequate housing. To Section B, increasing and preserving the supply of affordable housing. Add to this to end and further prevent homelessness. I would strike promoting more adequate and affordable housing for vulnerable persons and groups, and replace with ensuring that everyone's housing is adequate, affordable, safe, accessible, including proximity to necessary services and responsible to cultural needs for community building. I would also add to Section D, developing, delivering, and supporting programs related to housing. Add for the purposes of prohibiting forced evictions, addressing discrimination, focusing on the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, and ensuring security of tenure for all. Section 3, and this will be the crux of my presentation today, is that we add to this meaning section Housing for All Council, which means an accountability body that reports directly to the Legislative Assembly. I would strike that the minister may establish any committee or council the minister considers necessary or advisable to act in an advisory capacity and respect to any of the policies, programs, services, or other matters under the administration of the minister, and replace with the minister will establish a provincial Housing for All Council independent of the minister, which must include community-based provider representation and tenant representation and no more than one for-profit developer or business interest. The Housing for All Council will serve as the key accountability body that reports directly to the Legislative Assembly annually about the process of non-market housing and measures to implement the right to housing. Allow me to take some time to explain why these changes are crucial to health and well-being and safety of all Nova Scotians. Let me begin by stating that poverty is a political choice, and eliminating it requires that social justice and human rights are central to the ways in which we implement and measure human development. Housing is crucial to the elimination of poverty. Currently, our political choices have allowed for the financialization of affordable housing market, a lack of protection for tenants, have allowed low wages and low social assistance rates, which deny a meaningful quality of life to too many Nova Scotians. On October 17th, the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, I had the privilege of hosting a panel discussion on poverty, where doctors, lawyers, teachers, nurses, and social workers stood together and called for a collective response to end poverty in order to reduce the stress on all of Nova Scotia's social and health systems and to enhance the quality of life for all. The global pandemic has unveiled the deep structural inequities that exist in Nova Scotia, the erosion of the social safety net, the deep racial inequities that exist in our justice, health, and child protection systems, and we continue to address the substantial challenge of climate change. We are called on to examine our core values and press ourselves to respond differently. Good public policy recognizes the challenges are interconnected, and political decision-making must champion policy solutions that tackle multiple challenges at once. Nova Scotians are struggling to make ends meet, uncertain about how they may pay next month's rent or power bill. Many are going without food or rationing because they have to use their only discretionary money meant for essentials like food and medication to ensure they don't lose a roof over their heads. In Nova Scotia, thousands are without a place to call their own, living on the streets, couch surfing, staying in shelters, or relying on emergency stays that lack security of tenure. and that can end in mass evictions. Some are in accommodations they cannot afford or which are not safe or adequate or properly maintained. For others, there's a lack of housing that is accessible and accommodates their needs to live a barrier-free life. As housing becomes more unaffordable in areas located to employment, services, or amenity, it pushes many outside of their community, isolating them further. So many Nova Scotians are housing insecure. There are very little protections to support them to stay where they currently are as they face, again, evictions and rising rents, to find a more suitable location. Our response cannot be to punish the victims of failed government policy. These political choices have many consequences, specifically on the clients that social workers serve. For example, living in low-quality housing negatively affects mental health, and persistent housing problems are predictive of worse mental health outcomes. Cruelly, child welfare legislation in Nova Scotia defines neglect as the chronic and serious failure to provide shelter, along with other essentials like food and shelter. This subjects already marginalized families to investigations and leads to an overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black children in care. Or most tragically, it forces folks to live in tents, in unsecure, unsafe environments, and this has led to the forceful removal of those shelters. To be successful in ensuring that housing is a right, there must be a clear focus on rising inequality. I point to the data in front of you as a reference to this, but in 2018, the top 10% of income earners in Nova Scotia grew 16.3 times the income shares of the bottom. Rising inequality and the continued class divide between the rich and the poor has allowed the voices of the most vulnerable to go unnoticed, has eroded trust, and has increased anxiety and illness for all. And I note today that the first 5 presenters have all spoken about the lack of community voice, the lack of being heard, the lack of having the public who are affected by these issues be meaningfully consulted, contribute to policy that is going to impact their lives. This is a product of rising inequality. The lack of trust appears to be growing. Engage Nova Scotia recently produced data demonstrating that only 27.1% of Nova Scotians trust the provincial government. This erodes the social solidarity required to tackle large issues, such as the housing crisis, pits Nova Scotians against one another, fighting for resources perceived to be scarce rather than working together in solidarity for the common good. This is also the root of the rising radicalization we have continued to see in our politics and in our political discourse. Continuing on from this, if the Premier wishes to achieve his mandate of fixing healthcare in Nova Scotia, then housing and inequality must be a part of this strategy. Stress from housing insecurity has a significant impact on physical, mental, and social health, as I've demonstrated. Ensuring that everyone has a housing secure future is critical for the health of our collective community well-being. Currently, our approach relies too heavily on the private sector and the commodification of housing to increase supply. This will be a failed strategy, as supply alone does not impact housing affordability, particularly as housing is continued to be used as an investment to extract wealth rather than as a right to entitlement. The rapid expansion of non-market housing is the only proven way to ensure that affordability is secure. The market will never serve the interests of the most marginalized and the vulnerable, quite frankly, because developers cannot make a profit off of low-wage earners. Stacking profits through subsidies is also not the answer. There is a call to action here. Many of my peers and colleagues have presented the many flaws with this legislation. What we see as the striking flaw in this process is the power stacked into the hands of one person, particularly in our current environment. So social workers are calling for the democratization of housing. Our democracy is struggling. More strikingly, civil liberties and rights are being stripped consistently in this week in Canada in the name of political expediency. We've witnessed the rising influence of corporate and business organizations in politics. So what we would propose is that providing the Minister of Housing all the power to make policy decisions without considering whether this is deepening systemic oppression will lead to greater inequality. So the Housing and Supply Services Act must ensure that housing is a right and ensure that the Housing Council for All, an oversight body, can operate as a human rights oversight institution that follows the UN Paris Principles for Human Rights and ensures functional and formal independence to hold the minister accountable.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would ask if there are any questions from members of the committee. MLA Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alec, thank you for your time today and for your amendments that you put forward. It's actually really helpful to kind of see in black and white what you're thinking about. And all witnesses so far this morning on this bill have spoken a lot about the structure and the administration of this new housing entity and how it will work, and I agree. I think there are issues there, but I also think, and all witnesses have alluded to this as well, that there's, to me, the biggest oversight is the government's, I would say, almost complete disinterest in investing, I would say, in affordable or public housing in any way. And other provinces are doing some interesting things. The new Premier Designate in BC has put forward a proposal to create a $500 million fund in that province to acquire rental apartment buildings, essentially, that are going up for sale that would otherwise be snapped up and then redeveloped for the market. So I'm just curious if you kind of agree with the contention that, yeah, we can talk about the structure and there are issues there, but if we don't actually ever put any dollars into the system, we can have the best structure in the world, but we're still not going to get it anywhere.
Recognize the presenter, please. Yeah, that's 100% true. Now, ultimately, we'll contend with that when a budget is tabled, but 100%, if we are going to solve housing in this province, many of the reasons we're in a housing crisis right now is because there has been a 30-year underinvestment in public housing and non-market housing. When the federal government stopped funding housing, provinces did not step in. This has led to the crisis today. The reality is that the market alone will not solve this issue. As we've talked about, the market's goal is to earn profit, not to provide housing as a right. If we are to achieve affordable housing, significant financial investment in the development of non-market housing is crucial.
Thank you. Any other questions? I will recognize MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you, Alec, for your presentation. I want to say your Section 3 amendment for housing for all council, reporting directly to legislature. Can you explain to me what that would look like and why it would directly speak to the legislature?
Presenter, please.
Talking about rights. Every presenter today, as far as I've heard, has demonstrated that housing needs to be a right if we are to fundamentally promote the quality of life for people in Nova Scotia. Rights are incredibly important to our society. What we know is that if we are to protect rights, that there must be oversight. Oversight is crucial to the fundamental protection of rights. In fact, this government right now is working to better protect rights through the creation of a Child Youth Commission. Fundamentally, those independent oversight bodies are crucial to ensuring, again, accountability, good public discourse, and again, that the rights of citizens are heard and actualized. So the form and function of that council has to be representative of the community. It has to be empowered to do that work, and it needs to report not to the minister, so the minister can avoid recommendations or not table what is being said, but to the legislature so that it can be discussed fully and robustly in the public to determine what is in fact in the interest of all Nova Scotians.
Thank you. Recognize MLA Burrell, please.
Then continuing to think about the proposal for a Housing for All Council, can you say a little bit about what might be some of the voices that would be heard and registered if in fact we were organized on the model you're proposing, which are not going to be given effect in the model that's being proposed in the legislation?
Going to the presenter with just under a minute.
Yeah. So again, what the bill is proposing is, again, a retrenchment of democracy, removing boards and authorities towards the power of one individual to make decisions on public housing. Last time I checked, the Minister of Housing probably isn't living in public housing. They do not know the realities or the experiences of what impacts the day-to-day and the quality of life of folks. That first voice, the folks who live and manage and work, have to be central in assuring that oversight. The providers as well are key figures in being able to determine how we implement and operate. And of course, we've given space for developers. The problem with our current move forward is that the developer's voice seems to carry all the weight, and the voices of those who the developer is impacting seem to be marginalized or ignored. Hence today why you have a slew of speakers coming out stating just that very fact. So that is what would be the makeup of it. Oversight and accountability, particularly for the most marginalized and vulnerable, is also crucial to tackling rising inequality, which should be a concern to everyone, as it has such a fundamental impact on our politics, our quality of life, our political discourse, and we are trending in the wrong direction year after year. Entrenching more power in the minister continues
Thank you
that
very
trend.
much for your comments. I actually gave you a couple extra seconds there. I hate interrupting people in their train of thought, right? But it's to try to keep